Welcome to this quick lesson on extraction, compositing, and blending. I want to begin with the finished image so you can see what it looks like. This is my friend Chelsea. She came into the studio one day and I photographed her and another friend. The background is an image, a picture I took in San Francisco at the train station, and I wanted to put them together to see what it would look like. Now let me show you what it looks like to begin with. First of all, I've got the Chelsea and another layer, separation layer, which I'll explain shortly. Well, actually, when they started out, they were facing this way. So let's see what this looks like. So to begin with, I started with the background and nothing else. Now, as you can see, the light is kind of cool. There's a little bit of yellow, tan in the background. The light is very strongly coming from the right to the left. And you can see down here, very strong contrast between what's illuminated and what's not. I then extracted Chelsea and I put her on the image. Now the first thing you can see is that while Chelsea doesn't quite match tone-wise, she's also facing the wrong way, and that the light on Chelsea is coming from left to right rather than from right to left. And if you look at this for a moment, you realize this just doesn't look right. So I began by taking Chelsea and flipping her over so that she would match the direction of the light in the image. This can be a little challenging sometimes if you know, well, the light was really on the other side and it's going to look wrong if I do this. Ignore that and consider what the overall composite is going to look like. Where's the light coming from? How does it affect your subject as compared to what it is on the background? Now, I also looked at this and thought, you know, Chelsea doesn't look like she's really standing out from the background. There's not quite enough separation. So I added this separation layer, and once you know it's there, you can see it, it stands out. But if you don't know, if we just looked at this image for the first time, you wouldn't realize there's a slight glow around Chelsea, making her separate from the background. And finally, I looked at the color, and I felt like she didn't really match the color tone of the background, and so I added a little bit of shading to her. So once again, if you didn't know, when you looked at this at the beginning, you might have thought this all looked very natural, and yet it took all of these steps to make it look like Chelsea was actually on this background. All right, we're going to come back and we're going to build this whole thing from scratch. I just wanted you to see where we're going to end up and why we've done each of the things we've done. Okay, here's a quick reminder. This is the image we're trying to create, starting with the background and the image of Chelsea. Here's the background, nothing special about it, just a background with some color and some people and so forth. And here's the image of Chelsea. Now, if you look down here, you'll see that I've already done the extraction, but I want to show you how we do it step by step. Nothing magic to this, and in fact, we can do it all with the tools built into Photoshop. So let's begin by filling the screen with her, filling the window, because I always like to start that way. And I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to go to the magic wand, but I'm going to select the Quick Selection tool. The Quick Selection tool is designed to do just what we're about to do. I'm going to begin up here on her hand. All right, let's start with the layer that actually has her in it. Begin up here on her hand, and notice how it looks for the boundaries and the edges and goes to them very quickly. Now it's not going to be perfect, but that's okay because we're going to fix it. Notice up here around her hand, it's extending a little bit. I'm going to press the Alt key, the Option key, Option on Mac, Alt on Windows, and that tells it to subtract from the mask, and I'm going to go back around the hand just a little bit to get rid of that extra I put on there when I wasn't paying attention. I'm going to grab these fingers over here, make sure I've got them. Then I'm going to come down and I'm going to fill in the rest of her body and her hair. You've probably noticed that when I went down her hair, it picked up this gray area in the middle, and when I went down here, it picked up the area between her legs. To correct that, I'm going to go back up here and select the Magic Wand tool, and I'm going to make sure that it's on Subtract. So normally I would have had it on Add to the selection. This time I want it on Subtract. I'll go up to here to her hand, and I'll subtract that little bit. I'll go down here to this little hole in her hair. I'll subtract that. I'll subtract this area between her legs. And I'll just leave the rest of it because the next thing we're going to do is to use this tool called Refine Edge. And what that's going to do is pick up lots of little variations and loose hairs and so forth. And so let's see what that does. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make the brush larger. I'm going to use the right bracket key, which will make it a little larger. And then I'm going to look for the areas in which we've got a little gray that we want to get rid of. So for instance, you see here around her hair, we want to pick up those loose hairs, and we also want to get rid of this gray in here. I'm going to start by dragging from the outside into that area, and I'm going to go over the hairs. and I'm going to go over this area where we've got some gray in her hair. Notice what it does. It grabs that color that I've dragged in there and removes it. I'll do the same thing on this side of her hair to get rid of the gray in there. Got rid of that, and even though I did this area down along her side, I'm going to go over there because I want to pick up these loose hairs, get rid of this gray in her hair, and make sure we got a clean edge there. You can see kind of here that it may have picked up a little bit of her side, and we're going to fix that after we've done this. Now I want to take you here and look at the settings for refine edge that I'm using. As you can see, I like using a red background. You can use a variety of others. I can do it against a black background, a white background, black and white, so it does no color, just showing me the edges, the contrast. I can show it like it'll look on a layer. I like working on red, but for the moment I want to show you what happened on white, because remember I talked about down here, a little bit of the shirt got picked up, and you can see that it's lighter than it should be. We're not going to worry about that because we're going to fix it once we've got the mask. So for now I'm going to go back to my red overlay because that's the way I like to work. I've got the smart radius turned on, so it's going to look around and decide whether it should reach a little further out or not, and I've got that set to 1.2. The range I would normally use is somewhere between 1 and 2.5. As I said, I'm set on 1.2, which suits me fine. Smoothing, so just making sure we don't get any jaggies, I've got that set to 3. Feathering, so there's just a soft edge to the mask, just a hint of a soft edge, because most things in nature don't have a clear, sharp edge when you photograph them like this. So I've got that set to a 0.5 pixel. Contrast, so it knows how to detect the edge. Now if I take that up and it looks for more contrast, you notice that the side is picking up just a little bit, but mostly this has effect as I'm brushing. So I'm going to take this back down to 4, where I had to 3, excuse me, 4. Where did I have it? Anyway, somewhere in there. 4, 5, or 6 doesn't really matter. And then shifting the edge. And what shifting the edge does is it decides how far in or out from what it's detecting it should move the edge of the mask. So if I take it way down here, you'll notice that it pulled it way in. It pulled it in here around the hair. Down here, it's pulled in further on her shirt, and so forth. If I go the other way, it's pushing the edge outward, and it's picking up gray around her hair, gray around her hair here. Notice there's a little bit of edge around her blouse here and around her arms. I tend to like to pull it in just a little bit, so I'm going to set it to -4. Okay, -5, because I'm doing this with my stylus. I don't turn on decontaminate colors unless I'm working against a colored background. Since the colored background here is gray, it's not an issue. I always output to a new layer with a layer mask. If you output to a selection, it will be the marching ants on the current layer, wherever you are. It can just add a layer mask. It can create a new layer without a mask. I like a new layer with a layer mask, and I'll show you why as we finish up. And finally, I like it to remember my settings so I don't have to go and reset them every time. So I'm going to click OK here. And what you're going to see is I've got a new layer with a layer mask on it, as you can see down here. And now I'm going to look for those areas in which the mask is a little imperfect. I'm going to grab my brush. It's set to white. Let's make sure that my opacity is set to 100%. 100%, thank you. Oh. I'm going to set the flow to 100%. I'm going to turn off the airbrush. You'll know why in a minute why that was on, and go back to pressure sensitive because I'm working on my tablet. Now I'm going to start up here with her hand and see if the hand got picked up okay. Notice I'm going back to the brush. I'm going to shrink the brush way down. I'm going to make sure the brush is pretty soft, but I want a little bit of hardness to it. Notice that right in here at the edge of her finger there's a little bit of loss of opacity. I'll pick that up. There's also a little bit of color picked up here from the background, so I'm going to switch from black to white, or white to black, excuse me. I can either use this arrow over here, or I can use the X key on my keyboard to switch back and forth. And I'm going to come up here and take off that little bit of black up there. I'm going to take off, or gray, I'm going to take a little bit of gray off along her hand, a little bit along her wrist here. Don't worry about being perfect, only you know what it looked like before you did this. And now I'm going to start to move around the body. Now, I want to check the edge of the hand here. I think I've got a little bit of transparency here that I want to fix. So I'll go ahead and do that. Come down her arm. I'm not seeing anything there. I know I'm going to see some stuff in her hair, because I always do. And sure enough, there's a little bit of loss of color here, so I'll fill that in. Not too bad, actually. I'm surprised. Notice there's a little bit of transparency here on the edge of her shirt, so I'll go in and I'll just fill that in. I'm just brushing in with the brush set at 100% on white, because as you see, white is revealing the image, black is hiding the background. Nothing more along the side of her shirt. We knew we were going to see some stuff down here. I'm going to fill in her hair a little bit. Some light strokes there and there. Take some of that back out. I don't like that edge there, and I don't like that. I don't need that, because again, nobody knows what her hair actually looked like, so I can adjust it as I please. I'm just going to fill this in, and then remember I pointed out the side of her blouse got left a little bit of transparency, so I'm just going to fill that in there. And that's, I mean, it's really not that complicated. You just do a little bit of brushing here and there to fill in what you want to keep. If you see something you want to remove, just brush it out, because we're working on a mask. Get the edge here. I picked up a little bit of gray there. I'll get rid of that. And there we go. I'll go down along her leg. Probably not going to see anything here because we had good strong contrast between her pants and her shirt and the background. Come up along her right arm because we haven't been up here yet. Oh, good. It got her fingers really nicely. So I'm going to go back to the fitting it in the screen. That's Command-0 on a Mac, Control-0 on Windows, so that the image fits within the Photoshop window. So if I look back at what the image was originally, there's the original background, and with very little effort using the built-in tools, I've extracted the image. Next step, we're going to take this image and put it on the background. Be right back. All right, so just a reminder of what we're trying to accomplish. Here was one version of a finished image. Now, of course, if you look at this, you see that Chelsea's facing the other way, and we're going to have an issue with that. But let's address that piece by piece. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to select the Move tool up here, which is either clicking this or the V key on the keyboard. We're going to grab Chelsea, make sure the image is selected, and drag it up to the tabs. Wait till the background comes up, and I'm still dragging. If you're using a mouse, it's still clicked. I'm using my stylus, it's still pressing down, and let go, and it moves the image. Notice it's just that layer, because that was the only one visible, onto our background. Now, because it's too high, I'm going to drag it down a little bit. Now, I got to ask, does this look like it's about the right proportion? Should she be a little bigger, a little smaller? I'm comparing to this guy here in the background, who, because he's farther away, should seem smaller. Same thing with these people in the background. I think the proportions are actually pretty good. I could make her a little bigger, a little smaller, but I'm just going to leave it as is. So the next step is to address the issue that she's facing the wrong way as far as the light is concerned. Because remember here, let me put on a layer so I can draw some nice arrows, grab my brush. As we saw, the light is coming from over here and drawing in from the right to the left. But the light on Chelsea seems to be coming from the left to the right, which of course creates some confusion in the eye and mind of the beholder, even though they might not even realize that's what's happening. So let's get rid of that. We'll take Chelsea, and we're just going to take her, do Command-T or Control-T, which is transform. Notice the box around her with the little handles in it. I'm going to right-click, actually I'm using my stylus, but right-click on her and select Flip Horizontal. And now we see, and I'll hit Enter, which accepts that change, and now we see that the light is coming in from her right instead of her left. So it's now hitting her on the arm up here. Oops, sorry, I was drawing on Chelsea. Let's not do that. Let me pick up my blank layer. It's coming in from her right instead of her left. So now we have shadows on the left and light coming on the right. Okay, so we're making progress, and you could say that this looks okay. There's a lot of people who would look at this and go, wow, was she in San Francisco? However, you and I know that this doesn't look that great yet, because there's some little details that will make the difference between an okay composite and a good composite. One of them is that there's not clear separation between Chelsea and the background. And while it's very subtle, let me show you what we're going to do. So we're going to go down here to the background, and we're going to create a new layer. We can either do that by clicking on the new layer button down here, or we can press Control-Shift-N on a PC or Command-Shift-N on a Mac. I get a new layer, and I'm going to call this layer Separation. I'm now going to take my brush. I'm going to set the opacity to 20%. I'm going to set the flow to 20%, and I'm going to use the airbrush and turn off the pressure sensitivity. I'm going to make sure my colors are set to the defaults. That's pressing D on the keyboard. Oops, sorry, there we go. D on the keyboard. Notice we now have black and white. I'm going to switch them, which is X on the keyboard. And now I have a brush that is white, 20% opacity, 20% flow, using the airbrush, and no pressure sensitivity. I'm going to make the brush pretty big. I'm using the right bracket to increase the size of the brush. Yes, I really want it big. And now I'm just going to kind of smush it all around her body. Now you're not seeing very much, are you? Because it's only 20% opacity and 20% flow, so there's not a lot there. I'm going to add a little bit because I can come over here and add more because of the way I've got the brush set. Add a little more over here. Now you're starting to see that white, aren't you? Next thing I'm going to do then is add a bit of blur to it. So we'll go to Filter, Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to set that to about 15 to 20%. I'll go for 15 pixels. And I'm going to hit OK. And that's just to make that white look a little mushy. And then I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to go to Filter, Noise, and Add Noise. I'm going to set it to 7%, and I'm going to add some noise to that glow. Now you can't really see that glow very much because it's very soft. I'm going to do one more thing, which is take the opacity way down. So let's go down to about 36, 35%. Now you may be saying, I don't see the glow. What happened? Okay, if I turn off the glow and turn it back on, you can see the subtlety in the way that it makes her stand out against the background. So we've added a little bit over here on her side, along the top. And if I turn that off and on again, you can see the difference. So I'm going to leave that on. And it just gives it a little bit more of a realistic, set her against the background feeling. All right, so we've got Chelsea against the background. We've added the separation. The light's coming from the proper direction. But you know, when I look at this, the color tone on Chelsea, especially look at her face and her arms, just doesn't seem to quite match this background, which has just a little bit of haziness. It's a little cooler, I think. Maybe a hint of yellow, but also cooler. And so I want to add some of that tint to her to make her fit more effectively. So I'm going to come down here to the effects, which is the FX down here, a layer style. I'm going to choose color overlay. What color overlay is going to do, as you'll see, is apply a light to Chelsea. So I bring that up to 100% and I bring it to normal. All you see is that color. But as you saw, I'm using a blend mode of soft light, which means it applies to her. I'm going to take the opacity down some, but you know, I don't like this plain blue because I feel like it needs a little bit of yellow or something warm in it. So I'm going to take it down here towards the green. And notice how that's changed the tone of her face. So if I take the opacity all the way down, that's the original, which is kind of bright and high contrast and hard. And if I bring this opacity up, we see that there's just a bit of matching yellow. I'm going to add a little more yellow to that because I actually want to see what it looks like if I make it more yellowish, sort of matching those pillars back there, and take the opacity down a little more. And now, that looks pretty good. I don't need the inner glow. I don't know why that's on there. We're going to add, look at what happens when I turn off the color overlay. There's the original color, and there's the adjusted color. Notice how it seems to fit with the color of the background just a little bit better. At this point, we have a pretty good composite. I think I could show this to most people and they'd believe it. Here's the one I did in preparation for this. Here's the one I just did. Pretty close. The one I just did, I shifted the color to be a little bit more on the yellow side because I felt like that's what it needed. And otherwise, I think I could sell this, that is, convince people that Chelsea was really there. In the next episodes, in the next parts of this series, we'll look at how do we do some of the more subtle stuff, how do we add some textures, a little more with blending, and we may work with a more complex subject with a more difficult background where it's not shot against solid gray, where it's not so easy to separate it. In the meantime, thanks for watching. I'm Doc List. More to come in my series on extraction, compositing, blending, and textures.